My name is Rebecca Mitchell, and while I was serving my country in Afghanistan, my sister emptied our family home, sold our grandmother's heirlooms, and manipulated our dying father into changing his will. I returned from combat to find my inheritance gone, and my family turned against me. But what no one knew was that my grandmother had created a secret document decades earlier, one that would expose the truth and change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The desert dust of Kandahar was still embedded in my combat boots when I drove through the familiar streets of Oakwood Hills. After 15 months deployed with the Army Corps of Engineers, I was finally coming home. The April rain washed over my rental car, a cleansing contrast to the arid landscape I'd left behind just 72 hours earlier. I'd spent my deployment building infrastructure in war-torn provinces, constructing bridges, reinforcing schools, and designing water systems for communities devastated by conflict. It was difficult, dangerous work, but it gave me purpose. Every structure we completed represented hope for people who had seen too little of it. My father had been so proud. When I joined the Army after college, following in his footsteps as a third-generation military engineer. "You're building more than infrastructure, Becca," he'd told me at my commissioning ceremony. "You're building a future for people who've lost everything." Dad's health had deteriorated during my deployment. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, the diagnosis had come just 2 months after I shipped out. I'd requested compassionate leave, but Dad had insisted I complete my mission. "The work you're doing matters," he'd said during our last video call, his face gaunt, but his eyes still sharp. "I'll be here when you get back." He wasn't. Dad had passed away 3 weeks before my scheduled return, his battle with cancer ending more quickly than anyone had anticipated. I'd watched his funeral via live stream from a dusty forward operating base, surrounded by fellow soldiers who stood at attention in silent support as I said goodbye to my father through a pixelated screen half a world away. Now, as I turned onto Maple Street, the weight of his absence pressed against my chest. The 2-story colonial where I'd grown up came into view, its white clapboard exterior and navy shutters exactly as I remembered. Dad's American flag still hung from the front porch, now accompanied by a smaller service flag with a gold star. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, gathering strength for whatever awaited inside. According to my sister Vanessa's sparse text messages, she had moved into the family home to take care of things after Dad's condition worsened. She'd promised to maintain everything until I returned. The front door opened before I reached it, and Vanessa appeared on the threshold. At 36, my sister was 5 years my senior, though she looked much younger in her tailored dress and perfectly styled auburn hair. Unlike my practical military cut, her waves cascaded over her shoulders, catching the light as she moved. "You're finally here," she said, giving me a quick hug that felt more perfunctory than emotional. "How was your flight?" "Long," I answered, following her into the foyer. "But I'm glad to be home." The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The entryway was familiar, but as my eyes adjusted to the interior light, I noticed subtle differences. The antique console table that had belonged to our grandmother was gone, replaced by a sleek modern piece I didn't recognize. The original oils that had hung on the walls, landscapes painted by my great-aunt Elaine, had been swapped for generic abstract prints in minimalist frames. "Where's Grandma Mitchell's table?" I asked, setting down my duffel bag. "And Aunt Elaine's paintings?" Vanessa waved dismissively. "I've been updating things. This furniture is much more current, don't you think? The old pieces were so dated." A cold feeling settled in my stomach as I moved further into the house. In the living room, our father's leather armchair, the one where he'd read to us as children, where he'd recovered after his knee surgery, where he'd sat during our last Christmas together, was gone. In its place stood a cream-colored sectional, that looked like it had been pulled from a home decorating catalog. "Vanessa, where's Dad's chair?" My voice sounded strange to my own ears, tight with an emotion I couldn't quite name. "That old thing? I donated it. It was falling apart, Becca. Besides, this seating arrangement works much better for entertaining." Entertaining? Our father had just died. Who was she entertaining? I continued through the house, each room revealing more changes. The dining room set where we'd shared family meals for decades, gone. Mom's china cabinet and her collection of Royal Dalton figurines, gone. Dad's study had been transformed into what Vanessa called a home office/guest room, with no trace of his engineering books, military memorabilia, or the carved mahogany desk that had been his grandfather's. "What happened to Dad's things?" I asked, my initial confusion hardening into anger. His books, his desk, his medals? "I had to make some tough decisions," Vanessa replied, crossing her arms defensively. "The house was cluttered with outdated furniture and memorabilia that no one needs anymore. I kept the important things." "Like what? What exactly did you keep?" I demanded, my exhaustion giving way to growing alarm. "Don't use that tone with me, Rebecca. I was here taking care of Dad and managing everything while you were off playing hero in the desert." Her words hit like a physical blow. "Playing hero? I was serving our country. I would have come home if Dad had asked, but he wanted me to finish my deployment." "Of course he said that. He wouldn't have wanted you to see how disappointed he was that you weren't here when he needed you most." I stared at my sister, struggling to reconcile her version of events with the supportive video calls I'd had with our father throughout my deployment. He had never once indicated disappointment, quite the opposite. He'd repeatedly expressed pride in my service. "I need to see Dad's will," I said finally, changing tactics. "And I want to know exactly what happened to the family heirlooms." Something flickered across Vanessa's face, a momentary tension quickly masked by a practiced smile. "Of course. Everything's in order. Perfectly legal. Dad updated his will about 2 months ago. I have a copy in my files." She led me to what had been our father's study. The familiar room where Dad had helped with my science projects and written letters of recommendation for my college applications was now sterile and impersonal, dominated by a glass desk and ergonomic chair. Vanessa removed a folder from a cabinet and handed it to me with an air of calm confidence. "As you'll see, Dad made some changes to his original estate plan. Given the circumstances, he felt it was best to simplify things." I opened the folder and began reading. With each paragraph, the blood in my veins turned colder. According to this document, dated just 6 weeks before his death, our father had revised his will to leave the family home, his investments, and nearly all personal property to Vanessa. My inheritance had been reduced to a modest life insurance policy and his military medals. "This can't be right," I said, looking up from the papers. "Dad always planned to divide everything equally between us. We talked about it before I deployed." "People change their minds," Vanessa replied with a shrug. "Dad recognized who was actually there for him in his final months. He made his decisions accordingly. While I was deployed, serving our country, because he encouraged me to stay. That was your choice, Becca. I chose to be here." I flipped through the document again, noting the witness signatures. Vanessa's husband Mark and their neighbor Mrs. Calloway, an elderly widow who had always favored my sister. Not a neutral third party among them. "I need to speak with Dad's lawyer," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "Timothy Weber has handled our family's legal matters for decades. Did he prepare this revision?" Another flicker of tension crossed Vanessa's face. "Dad decided to use a different attorney, someone more contemporary. The will is perfectly legal, I assure you." The pieces were coming together now, forming a picture I didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. While I had been building bridges in Afghanistan, my sister had been systematically dismantling my connection to our family home and history. "Where are you staying tonight?" Vanessa asked, her tone suddenly businesslike. "I can recommend a nice hotel about 15 minutes from here. The Residence Inn is quite comfortable." I stared at her, momentarily speechless. "A hotel? This is my home, Vanessa." "Actually, according to the will, it's my home now," she corrected me, her voice gentle but firm. "I've been making mortgage payments since Dad got sick. I understand this is a difficult adjustment, but legally speaking, you don't live here anymore." The room seemed to tilt around me. Jet lag, grief, and this unexpected betrayal converged into a wave of dizziness that forced me to grip the edge of the desk. "You're kicking me out? I just got back from a war zone. Our father just died." "I'm not kicking you out," Vanessa insisted, her expression a practiced mask of sympathy that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm simply clarifying the current living arrangements. You're welcome to stay for dinner, of course. Mark is bringing home Italian from Salvatore's." I needed air. Without responding, I walked out of the study and through the front door, gulping in the cool spring rain. The neighborhood looked exactly as it had when I left. The Petersons' silver maple still dominated their front yard. The Hunters still had their quirky mailbox shaped like a lighthouse. Mrs. Delgado's garden was still meticulously maintained with spring bulbs pushing through the soil. Everything looked the same, yet everything had changed. I sat on the front steps, rain mingling. With the tears I could no longer hold back. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Carlos, a fellow engineer from my unit. Landed safely back at Fort Bragg. "How's civilian life treating you so far, Mitchell?" What could I possibly say? That while we were building schools in Afghanistan, my sister had been systematically erasing my place in my family home? That I had nowhere to sleep tonight except the quite comfortable Residence Inn? I slipped the phone back into my pocket without responding and tried to think clearly through the fog of jet lag and shock. I needed legal advice, but it was already after 5 p.m. I needed a place to stay, but the thought of explaining my situation to old friends felt overwhelming. Most of all, I needed to understand how things had gone so wrong. The front door opened behind me. "Becca, you're getting soaked," Vanessa said, holding out an umbrella. "Come inside. We can discuss this like adults." "Like adults?" I repeated, not turning around. "Adults don't manipulate dying parents. Adults don't steal family heirlooms. Adults don't kick their siblings out after military deployment." "That's not fair," Vanessa protested. "You have no idea what it was like here. I put my entire life on hold to care for Dad. Mark and I moved in. I reduced my hours at work. I drove him to every doctor's appointment and managed his medications. I was here every single day while you were off building your career. I was serving our country." I turned to face her now, anger burning through my shock. "And I offered to come home. Dad insisted I stay. We video called almost every day until he became too weak to hold the phone." "Video calls aren't the same as actually being here," Vanessa snapped, her composure cracking. "You weren't the one emptying his bedpan or listening to him cry out in pain at 3 a.m. You weren't the one making impossible decisions about his care when the doctors gave us conflicting advice." Her words landed like bullets, precisely aimed to maximize damage. I had already been wrestling with guilt about not being present for Dad's final months, guilt that he himself had tried to alleviate during our calls. Vanessa knew exactly how to weaponize that vulnerability. "I'm grateful you were here for him," I said finally, my voice quieter. "I truly am. But that doesn't justify taking everything, the house, the heirlooms, the things that connect us to our family history. Dad would never have wanted that." "You don't know what Dad wanted," Vanessa insisted. "People change at the end. Their priorities shift." I stood up, suddenly resolute despite my exhaustion. "I'm going to find out exactly what Dad wanted. I'm going to speak with Timothy Weber tomorrow, and I'm going to understand what happened here. Do whatever you need to do, Vanessa replied, her confidence returning. The will is legal and binding. You're just going to embarrass yourself by making accusations you can't support. I picked up my duffel bag from where I'd left it in the entryway. I'll get a hotel tonight, but this isn't over, Vanessa. Not by a long shot. Mark will be here with dinner in 20 minutes, she said, as if I hadn't spoken. Chicken parmesan from Salvatore's. Your favorite. The casual normalcy of her invitation. As if we were just sisters planning a dinner. As if she hadn't just informed me I was homeless after 15 months in a war zone, was the final straw. Enjoy your chicken parmesan, I said, walking to my rental car. Enjoy the house. Enjoy Dad's things that you've either sold or hidden away. Just remember that nothing built on lies stands for long. As I drove away from the only home I'd ever known, grief and determination waged war within me. I had survived Afghanistan, the IED that nearly hit our convoy outside Kabul, the midnight rocket attacks, the crushing responsibility of building structures that people's lives would depend on. I could survive this betrayal too. I checked into the Residence Inn that Vanessa had so helpfully recommended, set my duffel bag on the blandly inoffensive hotel armchair, and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time since receiving news of Dad's diagnosis, I allowed myself to break down completely. I cried for the father I'd lost, for the homecoming I'd been denied, for the family bonds that had somehow unraveled while I was serving overseas. When the storm of emotion finally passed, I washed my face with cold water and looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman who stared back had changed during her deployment. Sun-weathered skin, new lines around the eyes, a hardness that hadn't been there before. Afghanistan had taught me resilience, strategic thinking, and how to function on minimal sleep while making decisions that mattered. Those skills had served me well in a war zone. They would serve me now in this unexpected battle on the home front. I took out my phone and composed a message to Carlos. Homecoming complicated. Family situation, Fubar. We'll explain later. How's yours going? His response came quickly. Family threw surprise party. Almost had heart attack. Mom crying nonstop. Sisters fighting over who gets to make my favorite foods. The usual beautiful chaos. Sorry, yours is Fubar. Need extraction? The offer, though partly in jest, brought a small smile to my face. Carlos and I had pulled each other through some harrowing situations overseas. We had a shorthand built from shared experiences that few civilians could understand. Negative on extraction. This is a solo mission. But thanks. I opened my laptop and began organizing my thoughts. Military style. Objective. Understand what happened with Dad's will and recover family heirlooms. Intelligence needed. Copy of original will, timeline of changes, witness statements, lawyer consultations. Resources. Available. My savings. Military training in logistics and strategic planning. Integrity. I created a timeline of my father's illness based on our conversations and the medical updates he'd shared. I made a list of his oldest friends who might have insights into his final months. I researched Tennessee estate law until my eyes burned from the screen's glare. Around midnight, my phone rang with an unfamiliar local number. Rebecca Mitchell? A woman's voice asked when I answered. Yes. Who's this? My name is Eleanor Calloway. I live next door to your family home. Or I suppose I should say your sister's home now. Mrs. Calloway, one of the witnesses to the revised will. What can I do for you, Mrs. Calloway? I asked, keeping my tone neutral despite my suspicion. I saw you leave earlier today, she said, her voice lowered as if sharing a confidence. You looked upset, and I've been thinking about it all evening. There are things you should know about your father's final months, things that didn't seem important until I saw your face today. My exhaustion evaporated. What kind of things? Not over the phone, the elderly woman insisted. Can you meet me tomorrow At Jeanette's Cafe downtown? Say, 9 o'clock. I'll be there, I promised. Come alone, Mrs. Calloway added before hanging up. And don't tell your sister we spoke. I stared at the phone, hope and apprehension battling for dominance. Mrs. Calloway had signed the will that disinherited me, yet now she wanted to share information about my father's final months, information that didn't seem important until she saw my reaction today. Whatever she knew, it might be the first piece in understanding how my homecoming had transformed from a return to family roots into a reckoning with betrayal. As I finally lay down to sleep in the anonymous hotel room, one thought circled in my mind. I had built structures to withstand both natural disasters and enemy attacks. Whatever Vanessa had built in my absence, I would find its weak points. Engineers don't just build, they analyze. They problem solve, and when necessary, they redesign systems that have failed. Something in my family system had failed catastrophically. Tomorrow would be the first step in understanding what, how, and why, and ultimately how to rebuild from the ruins. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next morning, I arrived at Jeanette's Cafe 20 minutes early. Military habits. Die hard. Early is on time is late. The local breakfast spot hadn't changed since my high school years when my friends and I would gather here on Saturday mornings. The bell above the door still jingled, the vinyl booth still squeaked. When you slid across them, and the scent of fresh coffee and cinnamon rolls still permeated the air. I chose a booth in the back corner with a clear view of both entrances, another habit from deployment that civilian life hadn't yet erased. The waitress, a woman in her 50s I didn't recognize, brought coffee without my asking. "You must be Jack Mitchell's daughter," she said, filling my cup. "The one in the military." "Yes," I replied, surprised. "Rebecca Mitchell." "I'm Diane. I knew your dad from Rotary Club. Good man. He was real proud of you, talked about you all the time." She placed a hand briefly on my shoulder. "I'm sorry for your loss, honey. First round's on the house." The simple kindness nearly undid me. I thanked her and focused on adding cream to my coffee, using the small ritual to compose myself. At precisely 9 o'clock, Mrs. Calloway entered the cafe, scanning the room until she spotted me. Though, in her 70s, she moved with purpose, her silver hair neatly styled and her clothes well-tailored. "Rebecca," she said as she slid into the booth opposite me. "Thank you for meeting me." "Thank you for calling," I replied, studying her face for clues about her intentions. "You said there were things I should know about my father's final months." Diane approached to take Mrs. Calloway's order. After requesting tea and toast, the older woman waited until we were alone again before speaking. "I've lived next door to your family for 37 years, she began, arranging her napkin in her lap with precise movements. "Your father was a good neighbor and a good friend, especially after my Harold passed. Jack always made sure my driveway was plowed in winter and my gutters were cleaned in fall." I nodded, recalling Dad's regular schedule of helping Mrs. Calloway with household maintenance. "He thought highly of you." "And I of him," she affirmed. "Which is why I've been troubled since I saw you yesterday. Your face when you left the house. It reminded me of Jack in his final weeks. The same wounded expression, the same sense of confusion." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Calloway leaned forward, lowering her voice. "About 2 months. Before your father passed, your sister and her husband moved into the house. Initially, it seemed like a practical arrangement. Jack needed care, and Vanessa said she wanted to be there for him. But things changed quickly." She paused as Diane delivered her tea, waiting until the waitress moved away before continuing. "Within weeks, people stopped visiting. When I would bring over soup or baked goods, Vanessa would take them at the door, always with some excuse about why I couldn't come in. Jack was resting, he was having a bad day, The doctor had restricted visitors due to infection risk. This contradicted everything I knew about my father. Dad was social, the kind of man who believed in facing hardship in the company of friends. Even during his knee replacement recovery years earlier, he'd insisted on hosting his poker group from the hospital bed we'd set up in the living room. "Did you ever manage to see him alone?" I asked. Mrs. Calloway nodded. "Once, about 3 weeks before he passed. Vanessa and Mark had gone to some charity event, and Jack's night nurse called me, said he was asking for company and seemed upset." She wrapped her weathered hands around her teacup. "I found him sitting in his chair by the window, much weaker than when I'd last seen him, but clear-minded. He asked about you immediately. Wanted to know if I'd heard anything since you couldn't call that week because of some operation you were involved in." "Operation Falcon Shield," I supplied automatically. "We lost communication access for 9 days while securing a critical infrastructure project." "Yes, that sounds right," she confirmed. "Jack was worried about you, but proud too. He had your last email printed out and folded in his robe pocket. But then he started asking me strange questions. If I'd seen people removing furniture from the house. If I remembered which items had belonged to your grandmother Eleanor. My grandmother's name had been Eleanor Mitchell. Mrs. Calloway would have known her well as a neighbor for decades. "What did you tell him?" "I told him the truth, that I'd seen Vanessa and Mark loading furniture into a rental truck several times, but assumed they were making room for medical equipment or reorganizing to accommodate home care. A rental truck, so the family heirlooms hadn't just been updated, they'd been systematically removed while Dad was too ill to prevent it. Jack became quite agitated then," Mrs. Calloway continued. "He said things weren't right, that items were disappearing, that papers were being put in front of him that he didn't fully understand. He said he was too tired to read all the fine print, but that Vanessa assured him everything was standard." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. "Did he mention a new will?" Mrs. Calloway's eyes flickered down. "That's what I need to explain. About 2 weeks later, Mark came to my door, said Jack had updated his will and needed witnesses, asked if I would sign as a witness along with him. "And you did," I said, unable to keep the accusation from my voice. "I did," she acknowledged, meeting my gaze directly. "But Rebecca, I never saw the will itself. Mark brought me a signature page only. He said the lawyer had prepared everything properly, but needed a second witness signature, and Jack had requested me specifically because he trusted me." My mind raced through the legal implications. "So you signed a witness page without seeing the document it was attached to?" "I did," she admitted, color rising in her cheeks. "It was wrong of me. I justified it because Jack supposedly asked for me specifically, and because Mark said it was merely a routine update given his declining health. I trusted them because—" She broke off, looking ashamed. "Because what?" I pressed. "Because Vanessa had told me weeks earlier that you had abandoned your father when he became ill, that you'd refused compassionate leave and chosen your career over family, that Jack was heartbroken by your absence but too proud to admit it." The accusation felt like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "That's not true. I requested compassionate leave immediately after his diagnosis. Dad insisted I complete my deployment. We spoke almost daily when communications allowed." Mrs. Calloway reached across the table to touch my hand. "I believe you. The Jack Mitchell I knew for 37 years was incapable of dishonesty, and you have his same direct gaze. When I saw your face yesterday, the shock and confusion, I realized I'd been manipulated. We both had." She reached into her purse and withdrew a small notebook. "After you left yesterday, I went through my calendar. I've documented the dates when furniture was removed from the house. I've noted when visitors were turned away, and I've written down exactly what Jack said during our last conversation alone." She slid the notebook across the table. "This won't make things right. but perhaps it will help you understand what happened. I opened the notebook, scanning her neat handwriting. The entries began shortly after my deployment and increased in frequency during Dad's illness. She had meticulously documented furniture removals, unusual visitors, and overheard arguments. The final entry, dated just days before Dad's death, noted, V&M left house with Jack's military shadow box and medals. Jack would never have parted with these voluntarily. The military shadow box had contained Dad's service medals, including a Bronze Star from his time in Desert Storm. He had shown it to me the night before my deployment, telling me he expected I would earn my own distinguished service medals before long. "Did you see what happened to my grandmother's items specifically?" I asked, looking up from the notebook. There would have been jewelry, photographs, a grandfather clock, and personal. "Horse!" Mrs. Calloway nodded slowly. "The clock was removed about 3 months ago. I noticed because they struggled to get it through the front door. It's quite large. As for papers..." She hesitated. Mark carried out several boxes labeled Mitchell Family Archives about 2 weeks before Jack passed. Family Archives. Those would have contained not just photos, but important documents. Birth certificates, military records, property deeds, and possibly my grandmother's will and financial papers. Dad had always been meticulous about preserving family history. "Mrs. Calloway, this is incredibly helpful," I said, closing the notebook. "Would you be willing to put this information in an affidavit if necessary? If it means correcting a wrong done to Jack and to you, yes," she replied without hesitation. I should have spoken up sooner. I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't want to interfere in family matters. "You're speaking up now," I assured her. "That's what matters." After finishing our meeting, I thanked Mrs. Calloway and watched her leave the cafe. I remained at the booth, reviewing her notes and formulating my next steps. Timothy Weber, Dad's longtime attorney, was my obvious next contact. If anyone knew the truth about Dad's estate planning, it would be him. I called his office from the cafe and was relieved when his secretary recognized my name immediately. "Rebecca, we've been trying to reach you. Mr. Weber has been quite concerned since learning of your father's passing. Can you come in today?" 2 hours later, I sat in Timothy Weber's wood-paneled office. At 70, he still maintained the sharp focus and direct manner that had made him one of the most respected attorneys in the county. His handshake was firm, his condolences sincere. "Rebecca, I was deeply sorry to learn about your father. Jack was not just a client but a friend for over 40 years. I would have attended his funeral, but I only learned of his passing through the newspaper announcement after the fact." "You weren't notified?" I asked, surprised. Dad and Timothy had served in Rotary Club together for decades. They played golf every other Saturday during summer. Timothy shook his head. "No," which struck me as unusual. "When I called your family home, your sister informed me that another firm had handled the final estate matters at your father's request." His expression conveyed what his professional ethics prevented him from saying directly. He didn't believe this explanation. "I need to understand Dad's actual estate plan," I said. "The one you helped him create, not the revised version that appeared in his final weeks." Timothy nodded and retrieved a file from his cabinet. "Your father executed his last will and testament with our firm 3 years ago, following your mother's passing. He updated it only once after that, 11 months ago, to include a specific provision regarding personal items of military and family significance." He placed the document before me. Unlike the will Vanessa had shown me, this one was substantial, nearly 30 pages of detailed provisions. I skimmed the first page, which clearly stated Dad's intention to divide his estate equally between Vanessa and me. "This version leaves the family home to both of us, with the provision that if one wishes to buy out the other's share, a fair market valuation would determine the price," I noted, continuing to read. "Correct," Timothy confirmed. Jack was adamant about treating his daughters equally. He did, however, make specific bequests of certain items. He directed my attention to a section midway through the document, where personal property was addressed in detail. Dad had left his military memorabilia to me, along with his engineering books and tools. He had designated certain items of our mother's jewelry for Vanessa, along with artwork and china she had admired. The remainder of personal property was to be divided between us by mutual agreement, or if agreement couldn't be reached, by alternating selection. "This is completely different from what Vanessa showed me," I said, explaining the revised will she had presented, the sparse document leaving nearly everything to her. Timothy's expression grew grave. "I suspected something of this nature when Vanessa informed me that Jack had sought legal services elsewhere. It was entirely out of character for him to make such a change without discussion, particularly given our long friendship. She claims he changed his mind because I wasn't present during his illness," I explained. "That he was disappointed in me for not coming home from deployment." Timothy shook his head firmly. "That directly contradicts everything Jack shared with me." We spoke by phone approximately 3 weeks before his passing. He expressed nothing but pride in your service and understanding of your commitment to complete your deployment as he had requested. Relief washed through me at this confirmation. "What about a revision to his will? Did he mention any intention to change his estate plan?" "Not at all. Quite the opposite. He asked me to confirm that his existing will adequately protected your interests, particularly since you were deployed and potentially vulnerable to missing important deadlines or notifications. I assured him that the executor duties assigned to me would safeguard both daughters' interests equally." I sat back, processing this information. "So to be clear, as far as you know, Dad never revoked this will or appointed a new executor?" "No valid revocation was ever communicated to me," Timothy stated carefully, choosing his words with legal precision. "For a new will to completely supersede this one, your father would have needed to explicitly revoke all prior wills and codicils. Without seeing the document Vanessa showed you, I cannot comment on whether it meets that standard." He adjusted his glasses, his expression serious. "However, based on what you've described, I have significant concerns about the circumstances under which this alleged new will was created. If your father was heavily medicated, in significant pain, or not fully informed of the document's contents, its validity could be contested. Mrs. Calloway, who supposedly witnessed the new will, told me this morning that she only signed a signature page without seeing the full document," I added. Timothy frowned deeply. "That's highly irregular and potentially invalidating. A witness must observe the testator signing the will and understand what they're witnessing. Signature pages presented in isolation violate basic protocols for proper will execution." Hope began to replace the despair I'd felt since yesterday. If the revised will could be invalidated, Dad's true intentions might still be honored. "There's something else," I said, remembering Mrs. Calloway's notes. Vanessa and her husband apparently removed numerous family heirlooms and documents from the house while Dad was ill, including boxes labeled Mitchell Family Archives. Would those archives have included other legal documents? Timothy's expression sharpened with interest. "Potentially, yes. Your grandmother Eleanor was quite organized about family matters. When she passed, Jack became the custodian of all Mitchell family papers, including property records, financial documents, and personal correspondence dating back several generations. Would those papers have included my grandmother's will?" I asked, recalling how close I'd been to her before her passing when I was 16. "Yes, though its provisions would have been executed years ago." He paused, appearing to consider something. "However, there might be something else of interest in those archives. Your grandmother established several trusts during her lifetime. Most were dispersed according to her instructions, but there was one." He stopped abruptly. "I should verify certain details before discussing further. Legal confidentiality requires careful navigation here. He made a note on his legal pad. I'll review the relevant files this afternoon. In the meantime, I suggest you document everything you've observed since your return. Changes to the house, missing items, conversations with your sister. Take photographs of the current state of the home if possible. Vanessa made it clear yesterday that I'm not welcome to stay there. I said. She says the house is hers now. Timothy's eyes narrowed. Until this matter is resolved legally, your sister has no authority to exclude you from your family home. The property remains part of Jack's estate, which is subject to proper probate procedures. If the will Vanessa presented is invalidated, ownership reverts to the terms of the last valid will, equal shares to both daughters. He reached for his phone. Let me make a call to Judge Harriman. We need an emergency injunction to prevent further removal or disposal of estate assets until this situation is clarified. An hour later, I left Timothy's office with a temporary court order preventing Vanessa from removing any additional items from the family home or disposing of any property potentially belonging to Dad's estate. The order also explicitly stated that I had equal right to access the property until estate matters were resolved. Armed with this document and a renewed sense of purpose, I drove to the local police station. If I was going to re-enter my family home against Vanessa's wishes, I wanted to ensure I had law enforcement aware of the situation to prevent potential confrontation. The desk sergeant, a woman named Officer Rivera, reviewed the court order carefully. I understand your concern, Ms. Mitchell. We can have an officer accompany you to the residence to ensure peaceful entry and compliance with this order. Thank you, I said, relieved at her matter-of-fact approach. I'd like to go as soon as possible. We can have someone available in about an hour, she replied, checking the schedule. In the meantime, is there anything else you need assistance with? I hesitated, then decided full disclosure was best. Yes, actually. I'm concerned about family documents that may have been removed from the house. Specifically, boxes labeled Mitchell Family Archives that contained important legal and historical papers. Officer Rivera made a note. If you file a formal report regarding potentially misappropriated property, we can include that in our documentation today. I provided a detailed statement, including Mrs. Calloway's observations about when and how the boxes had been removed. As I finished, Officer Rivera looked up from her computer. You mentioned you just returned from military deployment? Yes, Army Corps of Engineers. I got back yesterday after 15 months in Afghanistan. Something in her expression softened. My brother served 2 tours in Iraq, combat engineers. She handed me her card with a direct line written on the back. Call this number if you encounter any issues after hours. We take care of our veterans here. That simple acknowledgement, we take care of our veterans, nearly broke through my carefully maintained composure. Since returning home, I'd felt increasingly isolated in my struggle, as if my service had somehow disconnected me from the community rather than strengthening those bonds. An hour later, I stood on the front porch of my family home with Officer Peterson, a steady-looking officer in his 40s. Vanessa opened the door, her expression shifting from confusion to anger when she saw me. What is this? She demanded, looking between me and the uniformed officer. Ms. Mitchell, I'm Officer Peterson with the Oakwood Hills Police Department. I'm here to ensure peaceful compliance with this court order. He handed her the document Timothy had secured. This order guarantees your sister access to the property and prohibits removal of any assets until estate matters are resolved. Vanessa scanned the document, her face flushing with anger. This is ridiculous. The will is perfectly clear. Ma'am, I'm not here to determine the validity of any will, Officer Peterson replied calmly. I'm simply ensuring compliance with a valid court order. Your sister has legal right to enter the premises at this time. Vanessa stepped back with clear reluctance, allowing us to enter. This is unnecessary drama, Rebecca. If you needed something, From the house, you could have just asked. I met her gaze steadily. I'm looking for the Mitchell family archives, the boxes of family documents that were removed from Dad's study. Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that I knew about the boxes specifically. I have no idea what you're talking about. Several witnesses observed you and Mark removing boxes labeled as family archives, I replied, keeping my voice level despite the anger building inside me. Those contained important family and legal documents that belonged to the estate, not to any individual. I organized Dad's papers as part of caring for him and his affairs, Vanessa countered. That's all. If you're implying something improper. I'm not implying anything, I interrupted. I'm directly stating that family documents were removed from this house without proper authorization, and I'm here to recover them, as is my right under this court order. Officer Peterson cleared his throat. Perhaps we could start by checking areas where such documents might reasonably be stored. For the next 2 hours, I methodically searched the house while Officer Peterson maintained a professional presence. That prevented Vanessa from interfering. I checked obvious locations first, the attic, the basement storage area, closets, before moving to less likely spaces. In Dad's study, now converted to Vanessa's home office, I noticed that the built-in bookshelves had been emptied of his engineering references and military history books. The drawers of the new glass desk contained only current household bills and decorating magazines. The boxes aren't here, I finally acknowledged to Officer Peterson. They must have been moved off-site. He nodded, making notes in his official report. We'll document that the items couldn't be located on the premises despite a thorough search. This will support any further legal actions regarding the missing documents. As we prepared to leave, I paused in the foyer, noticing something I'd overlooked yesterday in my shock and exhaustion. A small antique key cabinet hung beside the front door, a family fixture that had contained spare keys to various family properties for as long as I could remember. I opened it, finding it mostly empty except for a single key I didn't recognize, newer than the others, with a rental company's tag still attached. The tag read, Secure Storage, Unit 227. Without drawing attention to my discovery, I closed the cabinet and joined Officer Peterson outside. Vanessa remained in the doorway, arms crossed defensively. This isn't over, she called after me. You're wasting everyone's time and embarrassing yourself. I turned back to face her. You know, what Dad always said about building foundations. Shortcuts in the beginning create catastrophes in the end. Whatever you've built here on deception won't stand, Vanessa. Truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. As Officer Peterson drove me back to my hotel, I considered my next steps. The storage unit key provided a potential lead to the missing family archives. Timothy Weber was researching potential trust documents from my grandmother. Mrs. Calloway had provided valuable witness testimony about property removal and the circumstances of the will signing. Pieces were coming together, but I still couldn't fully comprehend what had motivated Vanessa's actions. Simple greed seemed too straightforward an explanation for the elaborate deception she had constructed. There had to be something specific she feared I would discover, something in those archives that threatened her narrative. Whatever it was, I was getting closer to the truth. And with that truth might come not just the recovery of my inheritance, but something far more valuable. Vindication of my father's true intentions and restoration of the family legacy he had worked so hard to preserve. The storage unit key burned in my pocket as I returned to the Residence Inn. A potential lead to the missing family archives couldn't be ignored, but I needed to proceed methodically. My military training had instilled in me the importance of reconnaissance before action, understanding what you're walking into before committing resources. I called Secure Storage from my hotel room and used their automated system to confirm that Unit 227 was currently rented to Mark Lawson, my sister's husband. The contract had been initiated 3 months ago, around the time Mrs. Calloway had observed the removal of family items from our home. With this confirmation, I had several options. I could use the key I'd found to access the unit immediately. I could report the potential location of disputed estate property to Timothy Weber and let legal processes unfold. Or I could confront Vanessa directly with this new evidence. The direct approach appealed to my military mindset. Swift, decisive. Action often prevented problems from escalating. But this wasn't a tactical operation in Afghanistan. This was a complex family matter with legal implications that could affect the rest of my life. Rushing in without proper support could backfire catastrophically. I called Timothy Weber and explained my discovery of the storage unit key and confirmation of Mark's rental. "This is potentially significant," Timothy said. "However, accessing the unit without proper authorization could complicate matters legally, even with a key in your possession." "What do you recommend?" I asked, pacing the small hotel room. "I've been researching the matters we discussed earlier today," he replied. "I've found some information that may provide leverage in resolving this situation more comprehensively. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning at 8? I agreed and spent the evening reviewing Mrs. Calloway's notes again, looking for patterns or details I might have missed. One entry caught my attention on second reading. March 15th, overheard V on phone in backyard, upset about grandmother's letter, and something about conditions not being met. Conversation ended abruptly when she noticed me gardening. Grandmother's letter, conditions not met. These phrases resonated with Timothy's earlier reluctance to discuss my grandmother's trust arrangements without verifying details first. The connection seemed unlikely to be coincidental. I slept fitfully that night, dreaming of Afghanistan interspersed with fragments of home, Dad's empty study, Vanessa's cold smile, boxes of family history vanishing into darkness. I woke before dawn, my body still operating on military time, and channeled my restless energy into a 5-mile run through quiet suburban streets. At precisely 8 o'clock, I sat across from Timothy Weber as he placed a worn leather portfolio on his desk. "This belonged to your grandmother Eleanor," he explained, carefully opening the aged leather case. "I retrieved it from our firm's secured archives yesterday afternoon. It contains documents related to a conditional trust she established before her death." "Conditional trust?" I repeated. "I don't remember hearing about this." "Few people did," Timothy said. "Eleanor was a remarkably private woman, especially regarding financial matters. The main provisions of her will were executed as expected. After her death, specific bequests to family members, charitable donations, and so forth. But she also established this separate trust with very specific conditions for distribution." He withdrew a sealed envelope from the portfolio. The front bore my name in my grandmother's distinctive handwriting, with a notation: "To be delivered to Rebecca Mitchell upon the death of Jack Mitchell or upon her 35th birthday, whichever occurs first." My 35th birthday was still 3 months away. Dad's death had triggered the delivery condition first. "Why? Wasn't this given to me after Dad died?" I asked, staring at the envelope. "Because I wasn't notified of his passing until after the funeral," Timothy explained. "When I learned of it and contacted your sister, she informed me another firm was handling all estate matters. I had no way to reach you directly during your deployment. When my office learned of your return yesterday, we immediately tried to contact you." He handed me the envelope. "This is legally yours now. Whatever it contains might explain certain irregular activities surrounding your father's estate." With unsteady hands, I broke the seal and removed several sheets of heavy stationery covered in my grandmother's elegant handwriting. "My dearest Rebecca, if you are reading this, either your father has passed on or you have reached your 35th birthday. Either circumstance marks a transition to a new phase of life requiring both wisdom and courage, qualities I have observed in you since childhood. When you were 12, I watched you rescue an injured bird, splinting its broken wing with popsicle, sticks, and determination. When the bird recovered and flew away, You cried not from sadness but from pride in having done something that mattered. In that moment, I recognized in you the Mitchell family's best qualities: compassion balanced with pragmatism, sensitivity with strength. These qualities led me to designate you as the ultimate guardian of our family's legacy, though you may not have realized this responsibility was being prepared for you. Enclosed with this letter is documentation for the Eleanor Mitchell legacy trust, which holds assets separate from those distributed through my will. These include my personal investment portfolio, established with the inheritance from my own grandmother, ownership of the Mitchell family vacation property at Lake Champlain, and various family heirlooms of both financial and sentimental value. The trust was established with your father as initial trustee, with provisions for you to assume this role upon his death or your 35th birthday. The assets are to be used for the preservation of Mitchell family history and the education of future generations. Importantly, this trust was not disclosed to Vanessa. While I loved both my granddaughters, I observed in Vanessa a tendency to value appearance over substance, acquisition over preservation. These traits are not conducive to stewarding a legacy meant to benefit generations beyond ourselves. Your father understood my reasons for this arrangement, though it pained him to maintain different provisions for his daughters. He agreed to inform you of this responsibility when the time came, allowing you to prepare gradually for this role as he had prepared you for so many others. If you are reading this due to Jack's passing, I fear the transition may have been more abrupt than intended. For this I am sorry. Know that this responsibility comes to you not as a burden, but as an acknowledgement of the person you have shown yourself to be. All legal documentation is included with this letter. Timothy Weber has served as legal counsel for this trust since its inception and can guide you through assuming your responsibilities as trustee. With love and confidence, your grandmother, Eleanor Mitchell. I lowered the letter, emotions washing through me in waves. Shock at the revelation of a previously unknown trust. Grief freshened by my grandmother's voice speaking from the past. And a dawning realization of what might have motivated Vanessa's desperate actions. Did Vanessa somehow learn about this trust? I asked Timothy, who had waited patiently as I read. I believe so, he replied. About 4 months ago, your father contacted me regarding the trust documents. He was organizing his papers in light of his diagnosis and wanted to ensure everything was in order for eventual transfer to you. He requested copies of the trust documentation to keep with his personal records. The Mitchell family archives, I said softly. The boxes Vanessa removed from the house. Timothy nodded gravely. If your sister discovered documentation about a substantial trust from which she had been specifically excluded, it would explain why she was so desperate to control Dad's final arrangements and estate, I finished, and why she would go to such lengths to prevent me from accessing family documents. I reviewed the additional papers that had been enclosed with my grandmother's letter. The trust was substantial, worth over $3 million in diversified investments, plus the lakefront property that had been in our family for generations. I remembered childhood summers spent on that pristine shoreline, learning to sail, on my grandfather's boat, telling stories around bonfires under star-filled skies. Vanessa told me that property had been sold years ago to cover Dad's medical expenses after his knee surgeries, I said, the pieces continuing to fall into place. She said that's why we stopped going there. The property was never sold, Timothy confirmed. Your father simply stopped using it regularly after your mother passed. The caretaker family has maintained it continuously under trust provisions. A new thought occurred to me. If this trust is separate from Dad's estate, then regardless of which will is ultimately validated. This trust passes directly to you as designated trustee, Timothy confirmed. It falls outside probate proceedings entirely. I sat back, processing the implications. Even if Vanessa somehow prevailed in validating the suspicious new will, she couldn't touch the trust assets. They had been protected by my grandmother's foresight and legally separated from other family property. The revelation brought clarity, but not satisfaction. While the trust secured a significant portion of our family legacy, it didn't address the immediate issues: Dad's true final wishes, the missing family heirlooms, and the home where we'd grown up. Most importantly, it didn't explain why Vanessa had felt entitled to erase me from our family history while I served overseas. "What about the storage unit?" I asked, refocusing on immediate action. Timothy considered for a moment. "With this new information, we have stronger grounds for a court order specifically targeting the storage facility. Judge Harriman can issue the order today, and we can arrange for a formal inspection tomorrow morning with appropriate witnesses." "And in the meantime?" I asked. "What if Vanessa realizes I found the key and empties the unit tonight?" Timothy's usually proper demeanor gave way to a slight smile. "I took the liberty of contacting Secure Storage this morning. As counsel, for your father's estate and your grandmother's trust, I placed a legal hold on Unit 227. No access will be permitted to anyone without court authorization." Relief washed over me. "Thank you." "You're welcome," he replied, his expression growing serious again. "Rebecca, I want to prepare you for what comes next. Family disputes over inheritance are among the most emotionally challenging legal matters I handle. The combination of grief, financial concerns, and long-standing family dynamics often creates conflict that extends far beyond the immediate legal questions." "You mean this could permanently damage my relationship with Vanessa?" I said. "Yes, though from what you've described, that relationship was already compromised by her actions during your deployment." I nodded slowly, acknowledging both the legal reality and the personal loss it represented. Whatever happened next, my relationship with my only sibling would never be the same. The following morning, I met Timothy outside Secure Storage along with a court-appointed observer, Officer Peterson, and a property inventory specialist. We presented the court order to the facility manager, who unlocked the security gate and escorted us to Unit 227. The padlock had already been removed due to the legal hold, leaving only the roll-up door between us and whatever evidence lay within. The facility manager lifted the door, revealing a space approximately 10 by 15 feet, filled with carefully stacked furniture and boxes. As the inventory specialist began photographing the unit's contents, I immediately recognized family items. Dad's leather armchair sat near the front, its familiar worn patches visible even under the protective plastic wrap. Mom's china cabinet stood against the back wall, still containing the Royal Doulton figurines she had collected throughout her marriage. Along the left wall, labeled boxes were stacked nearly to the ceiling, and yes, several bore the clear marking, Mitchell Family Archives. "We need those boxes specifically," I told the inventory specialist, pointing to the archive labels. As the boxes were carefully removed and opened for documentation, their contents confirmed our suspicions. Family photographs dating back generations. Military service records for Mitchell men who had served in conflicts from the Civil War through my father's time in Desert Storm. Property deeds, including the original grant for the Lake Champlain property from 1891. Birth certificates, marriage, licenses, and other vital records that formed the documentary backbone of our family history. And there, in a separate folder marked Eleanor Mitchell, Legal, we found it, a copy of the trust documentation that had been in Timothy's portfolio, along with my grandmother's handwritten notes about her decision-making process. Vanessa values what things are worth to others. Rebecca values what things mean to us. The legacy must go to one who will preserve rather than liquidate. The simple observation cut to the heart of the differences between my sister and me, differences our grandmother had recognized decades earlier. As we continued the inventory, more family treasures emerged. Mom's jewelry, which Vanessa had claimed was just costume pieces that had been donated. Dad's military shadow box with his service medals. the grandfather clock that had stood in our family's entryway for 3 generations. The inventory specialist meticulously documented each item, creating a detailed record that would be filed with the court. Officer Peterson maintained the chain of custody for any documents that might have legal significance. Timothy supervised the entire process with the careful attention to detail that had made him our family's trusted advisor for decades. By early afternoon, we had completed the inventory and arranged for the most significant items, the family archives and heirlooms with particular emotional value, to be placed in a secure evidence storage facility pending resolution of the estate dispute. The furniture would remain in the unit under legal hold, inaccessible to either Vanessa or me until court determinations were made. As we prepared to leave, Timothy received a call from his office. After a brief conversation, he turned to me with a significant expression. That was my assistant. "Your sister is at my office with her attorney, requesting an emergency meeting." "Did she say why?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "Apparently, she received notification of the storage unit inspection from the facility management. She's demanding to know what's happening with her property." I considered our options. Would it be productive to meet with her now? Or would that just escalate the situation? Timothy thought for a moment. Actually, with the evidence we've secured today, a direct conversation might be beneficial. It could provide opportunity for resolution without protracted litigation if your sister is capable of recognizing her position has been compromised. I agreed, and we drove directly to Timothy's office. Vanessa and a polished-looking man in his 40s were waiting in the conference room. My sister's expression was a mixture of anger and something I hadn't seen from her before. Fear. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded as I entered. "Breaking into private storage? Stealing property?" "Everything was done under court order," Timothy replied before I could speak, "with full documentation and appropriate witnesses. No property has been stolen, merely secured pending resolution of disputed estate matters." "This is harassment," interjected the man beside Vanessa. "I'm Martin Reynolds, representing Mrs. Lawson. My client has clear title to the items in question through her father's valid will." "A will being contested on multiple grounds," Timothy countered calmly, "including improper execution, potential undue influence, and contradictory evidence regarding Jack Mitchell's true intentions." He placed a folder on the conference table. "We've also uncovered additional relevant documentation, specifically the Eleanor Mitchell Legacy Trust, which designates Rebecca as trustee of significant family assets separate from Jack's estate." Vanessa's face paled visibly. "That old trust? It's not relevant to current estate matters." Her words confirmed what I had suspected. She had indeed discovered the trust documents among Dad's papers and understood their implications. "On the contrary," Timothy replied, "it's highly relevant to establishing a pattern of family legacy planning and Eleanor Mitchell's clearly documented intentions regarding family assets. It also establishes that certain items removed from the family home were never part of Jack's estate, but rather trust property that Rebecca is legally responsible for preserving." Martin Reynolds leaned over to whisper something to Vanessa, whose expression grew increasingly concerned. "We should discuss this privately," Reynolds said, standing abruptly. "Of course," Timothy agreed. "My assistant can show you to the small conference room." After they left, I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. She knew about the trust all along. "Clearly," Timothy confirmed, "and now she knows we know. That significantly changes the dynamics of this dispute." 20 minutes later, Reynolds returned alone. "My client is willing to discuss potential compromise regarding certain disputed items. However, she maintains that her father's final will reflected his true intentions regarding the primary estate distribution." Timothy's expression remained professional but firm. "Before we discuss any compromise, we need to address the validity of the will itself. We have evidence suggesting the document was not properly executed and may not have been fully understood by Jack Mitchell in his diminished state. Reynolds hesitated. What kind of evidence? Witness testimony regarding the circumstances of signing, documentation of Jack's medical condition and medication during the relevant period, and, most significantly, a witness who signed a separate signature page without seeing the full document. The attorney's confident demeanor faltered slightly. My client was simply trying to assist her father during a difficult time. Any procedural irregularities were unintentional. That will be for the court to decide, Timothy replied. We're prepared to proceed with a formal challenge unless your client is willing to acknowledge the earlier will as the valid expression of Jack Mitchell's intentions. Reynolds glanced toward the door where Vanessa waited. I need to consult with my client again. After he left, Timothy turned to me. They're reassessing their position. The evidence we've gathered presents significant obstacles to validating the revised will. What's likely to happen now? I asked. One of two paths, he replied. Either continuing toward litigation, which would be costly, lengthy, and emotionally draining for everyone involved, or settlement negotiations, which could resolve matters more quickly, but would require compromise. What would compromise look like in this situation? It depends on your priorities, Timothy said. If your primary concern is recovering family heirlooms and documents, we could potentially negotiate favorable terms on those items while conceding on other aspects. If reclaiming your equal share of the house is most important, we might focus our leverage there. I considered what mattered most to me. The family home held precious memories, but it was ultimately a physical structure. The heirlooms and archives contained our family's history, irreplaceable connections to our past that I had promised, through my grandmother's trust, to preserve for future generations. Before I could respond, Reynolds returned with Vanessa. My sister's usual confident poise had diminished noticeably, replaced by a tense vigilance. My client would like to speak with her sister privately, Reynolds announced. Timothy looked to me for confirmation. I nodded, curious about what Vanessa might say without lawyers present. After Timothy and Reynolds left, an uncomfortable silence filled the conference room. Vanessa sat rigidly across from me, her hands clasped tightly on the table. You've always been Dad's favorite, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Even when you were halfway around the world, you were the one he talked about constantly. Rebecca the soldier, Rebecca the engineer, Rebecca building schools for poor children in war zones. The bitterness in her tone was unmistakable. That's not true, I replied. Dad was proud of both of us. Vanessa laughed without humor. What? Exactly was he proud of me for, Becca? My failed interior design business? My marriage to Mark, who he always said was more interested in appearances than substance? My volunteer work that he dismissed as socializing with a charitable label? I hadn't known Dad had expressed such opinions about Vanessa's life choices. During our video calls, he had always spoken positively about both his daughters. And then I find out about grandmother's trust, Vanessa continued, her voice hardening. All those years pretending she loved us equally, when she was secretly planning to give you millions while leaving me nothing. The trust isn't personal wealth, I corrected her. It's for preserving family legacy and supporting future generations' education. I'm the trustee, not the owner. Semantics, she dismissed with a wave. You control it. You decide how it's used. And you were chosen because grandmother thought you were better than me, more worthy. The pain beneath her anger was suddenly visible, a glimpse into insecurities I hadn't fully appreciated. In Vanessa's narrative, she wasn't the villain. She was the overlooked daughter trying to claim what she believed she deserved. I didn't know about the trust until yesterday, I said truthfully. Dad never told me. But he was going to, Vanessa countered. I found the documents when organizing his papers after his diagnosis. There were notes about transitioning trusteeship to you, plans for your birthday. Everything always revolved around you, even when you weren't here. Her perspective was so fundamentally different from mine that it was difficult to find common ground. Where I saw Dad's pride in my service as support for a difficult choice, she saw preferential treatment. Where I saw Grandmother's trust as a responsibility to preserve family history, she saw financial favoritism. "What do you want, Vanessa?" I asked directly. "What outcome are you hoping for here?" She seemed surprised by the question, as if she'd expected continued argument rather than inquiry. "I want recognition," she finally said. "Recognition that I was the one who cared for Dad day and night while you were building your career. Recognition that I deserve an equal share of everything Mitchell, not just scraps while you control the valuable assets." I considered her words carefully. Beneath the resentment and manipulation lay a genuine human need to feel valued, to have contributions acknowledged, to belong fully to the family legacy. "I can't change Grandmother's trust," I said honestly. "Those decisions were made long ago for specific reasons, but I can acknowledge that you were physically present for Dad when I couldn't be. That has value that can't be measured in belongings or bank accounts." Vanessa's expression remained guarded, but something in her posture softened slightly. "As for Dad's estate," I continued, "his original will divided things equally between us. That seems to reflect his true intentions based on everything I knew about him and have learned since returning." "And the house?" she asked. "The house is part of the equal division. We either share ownership or one buys out the other's share at fair market value. That's what Dad specified." Vanessa looked away, studying the wood grain of the conference table. "I've already redecorated most of it." The comment was so unexpected, so divorced from the serious legal and ethical issues at hand, that I almost laughed. It was quintessentially Vanessa to focus on interior design amid inheritance disputes. "The decoration isn't the issue," I said. "It's the rightful ownership according to Dad's wishes." She nodded slowly, a subtle admission that her position had weakened with the discovery of the storage unit contents and trust documentation. "I need to speak with Martin again," she said finally, "to discuss options." After Vanessa left, I remained alone in the conference room, reflecting on our conversation. For the first time since my return, I had glimpsed the wounded person beneath my sister's manipulative actions. Someone who had interpreted our family dynamics through a completely different lens than mine, who had felt chronically undervalued despite the central role she believed she played in family care. This insight didn't excuse her actions, but it made them comprehensible. Perhaps, I thought, that understanding might eventually form the foundation for a different kind of relationship between us. Not the close sisterhood that seemed increasingly unlikely, but at least a respectful coexistence that honored our shared heritage without continuing patterns of resentment and deception. When Timothy returned, I shared the essence of our conversation. "It sounds like movement toward potential. Resolution," he observed. "Recognizing underlying motivations often facilitates practical compromise." "I think she's realizing her position isn't as strong as she initially believed," I added. "With the evidence we've gathered and Grandmother's trust documentation, continuing to fight may seem less attractive than negotiating." Timothy nodded, thoughtfully. "Family disputes are rarely just about property or money. They're about deeper needs, recognition, belonging, perceived fairness. Finding ways to address those needs often resolves material disputes more effectively than strict legal victories." His wisdom reminded me of engineering principles. Understanding structural weaknesses was essential to building lasting solutions. Perhaps the same applied to rebuilding damaged family structures. Reynolds and Vanessa returned together, both with the composed expressions of people who had reached difficult decisions. "My client is prepared to discuss settlement terms," Reynolds announced formally. She acknowledges that certain aspects of the revised will may be legally vulnerable and wishes to avoid protracted litigation that would further deplete family resources. It was the beginning of a potential resolution. Not perfect, not emotionally satisfying in the way vindication might have been, but practical and forward-looking in a way that honored Dad's pragmatic approach to challenges. As we began outlining potential terms, I thought about what my grandmother had written in her letter, about recognizing in me both compassion and pragmatism, sensitivity and strength. Those balanced qualities would be essential now as I navigated the delicate process of reclaiming my inheritance while leaving space for eventual healing of family wounds. The path forward would require strategic decisions about what to fight for, what to concede, and how to preserve what truly mattered most, not just physical assets or legal rights, but the dignity and meaning of our shared family history. The settlement negotiations extended over 2 weeks, with Timothy Weber meticulously protecting my interests, while allowing space for reasonable compromise. We established a formal framework: division of the family home according to Dad's original will, complete inventory and equitable distribution of personal property, and full acknowledgement of the Eleanor Mitchell Legacy Trust as separate from general estate assets. Throughout this process, I maintained emotional distance that served me well. The methodical problem-solving skills I'd honed building infrastructure in conflict zones proved invaluable in navigating these complex negotiations. Each challenge became a technical problem to solve, rather than another emotional wound to absorb. The final settlement, signed in Judge Harriman's chambers on a rainy Tuesday morning, contained several key provisions. First, Vanessa would purchase my half-interest in the family home at fair market value, a solution that allowed her to maintain the residence she'd made her own while compensating me appropriately. The court-appointed appraiser valued the property at $780,000, meaning my share came to $390,000. Second, family heirlooms would be divided according to a detailed system. Items specifically bequeathed in Dad's original will would go to the designated recipient, while remaining items would be selected alternately, with me having first choice given Vanessa's unauthorized removal of property during my deployment. Third, all Mitchell family archives would be professionally digitized, with complete copies provided to both Vanessa and me. The physical documents would remain with me as trustee of the Eleanor Mitchell Legacy Trust, as most pertained directly to family history preservation. Fourth, the Eleanor Mitchell Legacy Trust remained unaffected, with my role as trustee formally acknowledged by all parties. However, I proposed, and Timothy incorporated a provision allowing Vanessa's future children access to educational funds from the trust, matching the provisions for any children I might have, a gesture toward the future rather than the contested past. As we left the courthouse, Timothy shook my hand with characteristic formality. "This is a reasonable outcome, Rebecca. Not perfect, perhaps, but equitable under difficult circumstances." "Thank you for your guidance," I replied, watching Vanessa and her attorney depart without a backward glance. "It feels unfinished, somehow." "Legal resolutions often do," Timothy acknowledged. "They address material concerns but leave emotional reconciliation to the individuals involved. That work happens outside legal frameworks, if it happens at all." His words resonated with my experiences in Afghanistan. We had built bridges, schools, and water systems, physical infrastructure that supported community life. But the deeper work of rebuilding trust between fractured groups had required different tools and longer timeframes than our military mission provided. "What happens now?" I asked, more to myself than to Timothy. "Now you begin building your life here again," he replied simply. "Or elsewhere, if you prefer. The settlement provides financial foundation for whatever you choose next." The settlement, check for my share of the house arrived 3 days later, along with the first installment of family heirlooms selected through our alternating choice system. My first selection had been Dad's leather armchair, not because of its monetary value, which was minimal, but because it represented him so perfectly. sturdy, reliable, shaped by decades of use into something uniquely comfortable. I placed the chair in my hotel room temporarily, an incongruous addition to the generic corporate furnishings. Sitting in it that evening, I could almost feel Dad's presence as I considered Timothy's question about what came next. My military commitment had concluded with my deployment. I could re-enlist, continuing the engineering work that had given me purpose and direction. I could seek civilian employment with firms that valued my unique combination of technical skills and crisis management experience. Or I could chart an entirely different course, using the financial foundation Timothy had mentioned to pursue. New challenges. As I contemplated these options, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Rebecca Mitchell?" a woman's voice asked when I answered. "Speaking." "This is Catherine Reeves from the Oakwood Regional Development Authority." "Timothy." "Weber suggested I contact you. We're looking for a project director for our new infrastructure resilience initiative. Based on your background, he thought you might be interested in discussing the opportunity." The synchronicity of the call arriving during my career contemplation wasn't lost on me. "I'd be happy to learn more," I replied, reaching for a notepad. Catherine explained that the regional authority had secured federal funding to upgrade critical infrastructure throughout the county, with particular emphasis on resilience against extreme weather events. They needed someone who understood both engineering specifications and complex project management, someone who could coordinate between technical teams, government agencies, and community stakeholders. The position would allow you to apply your military engineering experience in your home community, Catherine concluded. "We're rebuilding systems that will serve this area for generations." We arranged an interview for the following week, and after ending the call, I remained in Dad's chair, considering this unexpected possibility. There was something appealing about using skills I'd developed overseas to strengthen the community, where I'd grown up, a continuation of purpose with a different context. The next morning, I received a text from Mrs. Calloway. "Noticed moving trucks at your family home. Thought you should know." I texted back a brief thanks, unsurprised by the information. The settlement had been finalized, and Vanessa was free to proceed with whatever renovations or changes she planned for the house. Our legal entanglements were concluded, even if our relationship remained strained. What did surprise me was the follow-up message that arrived minutes later. "Your sister asked for my number. Said she needed to speak with you but didn't have your current contact information." This was unexpected. Vanessa and I hadn't spoken directly since the settlement negotiations began, communicating exclusively through our respective attorneys. What could she possibly need to discuss now that all legal matters were resolved? Curiosity won over caution, and I called Vanessa's number. She answered immediately, as if she'd been waiting for my call. "Rebecca, thank you for calling back." Her voice lacked its usual confident edge, instead sounding oddly tentative. "Mrs. Calloway said you were looking for me," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Yes." She paused, then continued with uncharacteristic hesitation. "We're clearing some areas of the house for renovation, and I found something I think you should have. Something that wasn't included in the formal inventory." "What is it?" I asked, wary of any new complications. "Dad's journals. 3 leather-bound books I found behind the built-in shelving in his study when the contractors were removing Rao. The bookshelves." Another pause. "I've read some of it. He wrote about you. About both of us, actually." My heart quickened. Dad had never mentioned keeping journals, though it made sense given his methodical nature. "What kind of journals?" "Personal reflections, I think. The entries I saw start about 2 years ago, around when Mom died, and continue until about 2 weeks before he passed." Her voice softened slightly. "He wrote about his pride in your deployment, about missing you, about hoping you were safe." "Ours?" The simple confirmation of what I'd believed about Dad's feelings sent a wave of relief through me. Despite Vanessa's earlier claims about his disappointment, his own private words told a different story. "Thank you for telling me," I said, genuinely grateful for this unexpected gesture. "There's more," Vanessa continued. "He wrote about me too, about his concerns that I was trying too hard to impress people who didn't matter instead of building something meaningful." Her voice caught slightly. He was right. I've been thinking about it since reading his words. The admission stunned me into momentary silence. Vanessa acknowledging any fault or misstep was unprecedented in our adult relationship. "I'd like to give you the journals," she said, filling the silence. "They belong with you, with the family archives." "I appreciate that," I replied carefully, unsure how to navigate this shift in dynamic. "Would you like me to pick them up?" "Actually, I thought perhaps we could meet somewhere, not the house. Maybe Jeanette's cafe?" Her suggestion of the place where I'd met Mrs. Calloway couldn't be coincidental. "There are some things I'd like to say in person." We arranged to meet the following morning. As I prepared for this unexpected encounter, I considered what Vanessa might want to discuss. Was this a genuine attempt at reconciliation, or another manipulation? The discovery of Dad's journals seemed legitimate, but her sudden change in tone raised my instinctive caution. When I arrived at Jeanette's, Vanessa was already there, seated in a booth with 3 leather-bound volumes stacked neatly beside her. She looked different somehow, her usual perfectly styled appearance slightly softened, her expression less guarded. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." "I'm curious about Dad's journals." I replied honestly. She nodded, placing her hand on the topmost volume. "I found them 3 days ago. The contractors were removing the built-in shelving in Dad's study, and there was a small hidden compartment behind the center section. These were inside, along with this." She reached into her purse and withdrew a small velvet box, which she placed on the table between us. "It's Mom's engagement ring. Dad must have hidden it there after she passed. There was a note with it, addressed to you." I opened the box carefully. Inside lay our mother's emerald ring, a family heirloom that had passed through 3 generations of Mitchell women. The accompanying note, written in Dad's precise hand, simply read, "For Rebecca, to continue the tradition when the time comes." "He wanted you to have it," Vanessa said quietly. "Along with the journals, I think he knew I might not handle things well after he was gone. He created this hiding place to ensure certain things reached you directly." The acknowledgement of her behavior, however indirect, represented a significant shift. I studied my sister's face, looking for signs of the calculation or manipulation I'd grown accustomed to detecting. Instead, I saw something unfamiliar, vulnerability, perhaps even regret. "What made you decide to give these to me?" I asked. "You could have kept them, and I would never have known they existed." Vanessa's gaze dropped to her coffee cup. "I read some passages first. Things Dad wrote about both of us, about his hopes and disappointments." She looked up again, meeting my eyes directly. "He saw us clearly, Becca. Both of us, our strengths, and our flaws. And he loved us anyway, exactly as we were." She pushed the journals toward me. Reading his private thoughts made me realize how much I've distorted our family narrative to justify my actions. I've told myself stories about being overlooked or undervalued, when the truth was much more complicated. This level of self-awareness from Vanessa was unprecedented. Whatever she had read in those journals had catalyzed a significant re-examination of her perspective. "Dad wrote about how you called him every day from Afghanistan when you could," she continued. "How you sent part of your combat pay to help with his medical expenses without telling him. He found out from the bank. How you volunteered for the most dangerous infrastructure projects because you believed everyone deserved safe schools and clean water, even in war zones. I hadn't realized Dad knew about the money I'd sent. I'd arranged the transfers directly to his account without discussion, not wanting him to worry about my finances while dealing with his health challenges. He also wrote about me, Vanessa said, her voice tightening, about how my need for status and recognition had become an obstacle to genuine achievement, how he worried I measured my worth through possessions rather than contributions. She swallowed hard. He was right. I've spent my life trying to impress people by accumulating the trappings of success rather than doing work that matters. The painful honesty of her self-assessment disarmed me completely. This wasn't the Vanessa I'd confronted upon my return. Calculating, defensive, manipulative. This was someone engaged in the difficult work of self-examination. Why now? I asked. What changed? Reading Dad's words forced me to see myself through his eyes, she replied. And then there was the settlement process. Your approach, your willingness to compromise where it made sense, your insistence on principle where it mattered, it reminded me of Dad, of the best parts of our family legacy that I've been trying to claim without actually embodying. She gestured toward the journals. There's an entry from about 6 months before he died. He wrote that he was proud of how your military service had shaped you into someone who could both build and protect, who understood that strength without compassion accomplishes nothing meaningful. The characterization aligned perfectly with values Dad had instilled throughout my childhood. He had never seen military service as primarily about force, but rather about creating conditions where communities could thrive in safety and security. I've been thinking about what he would think of my actions after his death, Vanessa continued. The manipulation, the deception, the attempt to erase you from our family legacy. She shook her head. He would have been deeply disappointed. Not because he loved you more, but because he raised us both to be better than that. The acknowledgement of her actions, spoken plainly without justification, created an opening I hadn't anticipated in our relationship. Not reconciliation exactly, but perhaps the beginning of a more honest dynamic. I can't undo what I did, Vanessa said. The trust breach may be irreparable, but I can acknowledge the wrong and try to move forward with more integrity. She reached into her purse again and withdrew a small flash drive. This contains copies of all the family photographs I removed from the house, digitized at high resolution. The settlement specified that the physical albums would be part of the selection process, but I wanted you to have digital copies of everything, regardless of which originals you receive. The gesture, practical and thoughtful, suggested genuine intent behind her words. Family photographs held significance beyond their material value. They were visual documentation of our shared history, connections to moments that shaped our understanding of belonging. Thank you, I said simply, accepting both the flash drive and the complexity of emotions this conversation had surfaced. We sat in silence for a moment, the journals and ring box between us like physical manifestations of the family legacy we were both trying to navigate in our different ways. What will you do now? Vanessa finally asked. I have a job interview next week with the Regional Development Authority, I replied. Infrastructure Resilience Project Management, using my engineering background to strengthen community systems. That sounds perfect for you, she said, and I was surprised by the apparent sincerity in her voice. Building things that last, that's always been your strength. What about you? She considered the question thoughtfully. I'm re-evaluating. Everything, honestly. My interior design business, my social circles, even my marriage. She gave a small, self-deprecating smile. Mark and I are struggling. He doesn't understand why I'm suddenly questioning the value system our relationship was built on. The admission of marital difficulties represented another layer of vulnerability I hadn't expected. Vanessa had always projected an image of perfect domestic harmony, regardless of underlying realities. Dad wrote about finding work that serves others, she continued. about how his engineering career gave him purpose because he was creating infrastructure that improved people's daily lives. I've never approached my work that way. It's always been about status and aesthetics, never about genuine service or contribution. It's never too late to shift direction, I offered, thinking of the career transitions I'd witnessed among fellow service members. That's what I'm trying to figure out. What meaningful contribution looks like for me, with my particular skills and background. She straightened her shoulders slightly. I've been talking with the director at the Children's Hospital about redesigning their family spaces, creating environments that support emotional well-being during medical crises. It's a volunteer position initially, but it feels like a step toward something more meaningful. The initiative sounded genuine, applying her design skills toward supportive environments for families facing traumatic circumstances. It represented a potential bridge between her aesthetic talents and more substantive contribution. That sounds worthwhile, I said, meaning it sincerely. Vanessa nodded, then glanced at her watch. I should go. The contractors are waiting for decisions about the kitchen renovation. She hesitated, then added, I kept Dad's study intact. I thought you might want to see it one more time before the renovations proceed further. The offer caught me off guard. You'd be comfortable with me coming to the house? It's still your family home, Rebecca, regardless of legal ownership. The settlement gives me the property, but it can't erase your connection to it. She stood, gathering her purse. If you want to come by, just text me first so I can make sure the contractors give you space. As Vanessa left the cafe, I remained at the booth, processing our unexpected conversation. The journals beside me represented a direct connection to Dad's thoughts during his final years, insights and reflections I had missed while serving overseas. The ring in its velvet box carried both family history and his specific intention that I continue a tradition spanning generations. These tangible links to my father provided a different kind of inheritance than the financial settlement or distributed heirlooms, a legacy of values, perspectives, and hopes that transcended material possessions. Whatever Dad had written in these volumes had apparently prompted significant self-reflection in Vanessa, suggesting their contents might offer equally valuable insights for my own path forward. I ordered another coffee and opened the first journal, recognizing Dad's precise handwriting immediately. The earliest entry was dated 2 weeks after Mom's funeral, a period when grief had still been raw and disorienting for our entire family. Eleanor is gone, and I find myself keeper of 2 legacies now: the Mitchell family history through my mother, and the Wilson traditions through my wife. Both entrusted me with preserving what matters for our daughters, though they have such different approaches to inheritance. Vanessa sees legacy primarily through objects: the silver, the furniture, the tangible symbols of family achievement. Rebecca looks deeper, seeking the stories, values, and connections that give those objects meaning. Neither approach is wrong. Exactly. But Eleanor Mitchell understood the difference when she established her trust provisions. She recognized in Rebecca the same quality she herself possessed: the ability to serve as steward rather than owner, preserving what matters not for personal benefit, but for generations beyond our own. I worry sometimes about Vanessa. Her focus on appearance and acquisition seems to intensify with each professional setback. She measures herself against external standards: the size of her home, the exclusivity of her social circles, the visible markers of success that others can readily observe and envy. This orientation toward external validation leaves her vulnerable to manipulation and distorted priorities. Rebecca faces different challenges. Her commitment to service sometimes leads her to discount her own needs and well-being. Her dedication to mission, whether academic, professional, or now military, can create blind spots regarding personal relationships and sustainable self-care. She builds for others beautifully, but sometimes neglects to construct the support systems her own life requires. As father to both, I see my task as helping each daughter develop what the other possesses naturally, helping Vanessa discover the deeper satisfaction of contribution beyond acquisition, helping Rebecca balance sacrifice with necessary self-preservation. Time will tell whether I succeed in this most important engineering project of all, building bridges between my daughters' different worlds and values, foundations that will support them when I am no longer here to mediate their differences. The entry concluded with a simple statement that brought tears to my eyes. I am immensely proud of both my daughters, not for their achievements, but for their essential characters. I hope they will eventually recognize the complementary strengths they could offer one another, if only they would see beyond their differences. Dad had seen us both so clearly, our strengths and our limitations, our different approaches to shared heritage. More importantly, he had recognized potential synergy in our differences, complementary qualities that could strengthen rather than divide us. Whether such synergy remained possible after recent events was uncertain. The damage to trust created by Vanessa's actions during my deployment wouldn't be erased by a single conversation or gesture, no matter how genuine her current self-reflection might be. Yet Dad's journals offered something I hadn't fully possessed upon my return: context for understanding the family dynamics that had shaped both Vanessa's actions and my responses. This understanding didn't excuse what had happened, but it provided foundation for potentially navigating a different relationship moving forward. Not the close sisterhood Dad had hoped for, perhaps, but possibly a more honest coexistence than our previous patterns had allowed. I closed the journal, carefully gathered all 3 volumes along with Mom's ring, and left the cafe. Outside, spring sunshine had broken through the morning clouds, illuminating familiar streets with fresh clarity. The Oakwood Hills I had returned to was both unchanged and fundamentally altered. The physical landscape consistent, the emotional terrain transformed by recent events. As I drove back to my hotel, I considered Timothy's question about what came next with new perspective. The settlement had provided financial foundation. Dad's journals offered emotional and philosophical guidance. The potential position with the Regional Development Authority represented opportunity to apply my skills toward community resilience. These elements formed the beginning of reconstruction, not just of my individual life after deployment, but of relationship to place, family history, and future possibilities. Like the infrastructure projects I'd overseen in Afghanistan, this rebuilding would require careful assessment of existing conditions, strategic planning for long-term sustainability, and patience through the implementation process. The key difference was that this project centered on personal rather than physical infrastructure, the internal systems that would support moving forward with purpose and integrity, regardless of past betrayals or ongoing challenges with family dynamics. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I checked it at a stoplight, I found a message from Catherine Reeves at the Regional Authority. Reviewed your military project portfolio. Impressive work under difficult conditions. Looking forward to our interview next week. This community needs your expertise. The simple acknowledgement of value, not just of my technical skills, but of their application in challenging environments, resonated deeply. Perhaps Dad had been right about the complementary strengths Vanessa and I possessed. Her ability to create aesthetically pleasing environments and my capacity to build functional systems that served community needs represented different but equally valuable forms of contribution. As I continued toward the hotel, Mom's ring in my pocket and Dad's journals on the seat beside me, I felt a gradual shift in perspective. What had begun as a battle to reclaim stolen inheritance had evolved into something more nuanced, an opportunity to honor family legacy, not just through possessing objects or controlling assets, but through embodying the values and commitments that gave those material aspects meaning. The inheritance that mattered most hadn't been stolen after all. It resided in the approaches to contribution and service that Dad had modeled throughout his life, the balance of pragmatism and compassion. My grandmother had recognized in me and the resilience developed through both military service and navigating recent challenges. This deeper inheritance, the one that shaped character rather than bank accounts, remained intact, possibly even strengthened by the necessity of defending its importance against those who had temporarily mistaken possessions for legacy. With this realization came a sense of possibility I hadn't experienced since before my deployment, not the closure of chapters completed, but the opening of new ones built on more solid foundation than before. Whatever came next would be approached with clearer understanding of what truly constituted my inheritance. Not just what had been left to me, but what I would eventually leave behind. The interview with Catherine Reeves and the Regional Development Authority Board exceeded my expectations. Walking into their downtown office, I found myself facing a panel of 5 professionals whose expressions shifted from polite interest to genuine engagement as I described my engineering work in Afghanistan. "What we're looking for," said Catherine as we neared the end of our discussion, "is someone who understands both the technical aspects of infrastructure resilience and the human impact of these systems. Someone who can translate between engineers, government officials, and community members." That intersection was precisely my role overseas, I explained. Building schools isn't just about structural integrity. It's about creating safe spaces where education can flourish despite surrounding instability. Water systems aren't merely technical solutions. They're lifelines that allow communities to function during crisis. The board chairman, a silver-haired man named Robert Jacobs, leaned forward. "What makes you want to apply these skills here in Oakwood County, rather than continuing with military projects or joining a private engineering firm? Those options would likely offer significantly higher compensation." It was a fair question that deserved an honest answer. I've seen what happens when infrastructure fails in crisis situations. The communities hit hardest are invariably those with outdated systems that weren't designed for resilience. I don't want my hometown to face similar vulnerabilities when extreme weather events or other emergencies occur. I continued with growing conviction. There's also something powerful about strengthening the place that shaped you. I've spent years building infrastructure overseas. Now I'd like to apply those lessons to protect and enhance the community that gave me my foundation. 2 days later, Catherine called to offer me the position. The board was unanimous. She said, "Your combination of technical expertise and commitment to community impact is exactly what this initiative needs." The role came with a substantial challenge, coordinating a 5-year, $47 million infrastructure modernization program across the county. Projects ranged from stormwater management improvements to communications system upgrades designed to function during emergencies. The position would require balancing technical requirements with community priorities, government regulations, and budget constraints, precisely the complex problem-solving environment where I thrived. I accepted without hesitation, and Catherine asked if I could start in 2 weeks. "We've been without a project director for nearly 3 months. The previous candidate accepted, then backed out for a private sector position. We're eager to get moving." The compressed timeline created logistical challenges. I needed to find permanent housing, having extended my stay at the Residence Inn longer than initially planned. The settlement funds provided financial flexibility, but I hadn't decided whether to purchase a new home or rent while getting established in my new role. That evening, I continued reading Dad's journals, finding insight and occasional humor in his observations about family dynamics and community changes. An entry from 18 months earlier caught my attention. "Drove by the old Hamilton property today. That beautiful Victorian on Hillcrest that Eleanor always admired. It's on the market again after the Reynolds family moved to Chicago. Needs significant renovation but has remarkable structural integrity according to Jim at the building department. Found myself thinking it would suit Rebecca if she ever returns to Oakwood permanently. It has that perfect combination of solid foundations and potential for improvement that matches her engineering mindset." Dad's observation about the property aligned with his deeper understanding of my personality and preferences. I had always appreciated historic architecture with good bones, structures built with craftsmanship, and materials rarely found in modern construction. The next morning, I called a real estate agent to inquire whether the Hamilton house remained available. "Actually, it's still on the market," said the agent, sounding surprised that I knew about it. "It's been listed for nearly 2 years now. Beautiful property but needs extensive updating, and most buyers want move-in ready these days." We arranged a viewing for that afternoon. Driving up Hillcrest Avenue, I immediately recognized the house from childhood. A stately Victorian with wraparound porch, distinctive turret, and characteristic gingerbread trim. The paint had faded and portions of the ornamental woodwork needed repair, but the home's essential dignity remained intact. Inside, high ceilings and abundant natural light created a sense of openness despite the traditional floor plan. Original hardwood floors showed wear but could be restored. The kitchen and bathrooms would require complete modernization, but the fundamental structure, from foundation to roof, had been meticulously maintained. The previous owners prioritized structural integrity over cosmetic updates, the agent explained, echoing Dad's journal comments. New roof 5 years ago, foundation work completed, electrical system upgraded to modern standards. It's solid where it counts, but the aesthetic elements need attention. As we toured the upper floors, I found myself mentally redesigning spaces, identifying structural elements to preserve and areas where contemporary functionality could be integrated without compromising the home's historic character. The third floor, turret room with windows facing 3 directions, struck me as a perfect home office space, offering both natural light and views across the community I would be working to strengthen. "The price has been reduced twice," the agent mentioned as we returned to the main floor. "The current owner is an investment company that purchased it as part of a portfolio. They're motivated to sell rather than continue carrying costs on a vacant property. The asking price, while substantial, fell well within my budget given the settlement funds and new salary. More importantly, the property represented precisely what I needed. A solid foundation with potential for thoughtful renovation, mirroring the personal reconstruction I was undertaking in my post-deployment, post-family conflict life. "I'd like to make an offer," I said, surprising both myself and the agent with the decisiveness. 3 days and some negotiation later, I signed purchase documents for the Hamilton house, with closing scheduled in 30 days. The property would require significant work before becoming fully habitable, but key systems were functional enough to allow me to move in while undertaking a phased renovation approach. As I planned this reconstruction process, I found myself applying the same methodical assessment and prioritization strategies I'd used in military engineering projects. First, priorities were safety and essential functionality, ensuring all systems met code requirements and basic needs were met. Secondary priorities involved improved efficiency and functionality, updating the kitchen and bathrooms with modern fixtures while preserving historical elements where possible. Aesthetic enhancements would come last, after the fundamental structure was sound and operational. This approach provided a framework not just for renovating the house, but for rebuilding my life in Oakwood Hills, establishing essential foundations first, then enhancing functionality, with refinements to follow as resources and time allowed. 2 weeks after accepting the position with the Regional Development Authority, I moved into the partially renovated Hamilton house and began my new role. The initial weeks demanded intense focus as I familiarized myself with existing project plans, regulatory requirements, and the complex network of stakeholders involved in infrastructure initiatives. The work itself played to my strengths: analyzing systems, identifying vulnerabilities, developing resilient solutions, and coordinating diverse teams toward common objectives. Each morning, I reviewed project timelines and budget allocations before attending coordination meetings with municipal leaders, engineering contractors, and community representatives. "You've brought remarkable clarity to these discussions," Catherine commented, after I successfully mediated a contentious meeting. between county officials and neighborhood representatives regarding stormwater management priorities. Both sides felt heard while still moving toward necessary technical solutions. Infrastructure projects ultimately serve people, I replied. Technical excellence matters, but so does understanding community priorities and concerns. Finding that balance was essential in Afghanistan, where cultural context was as important as engineering specifications. As I settled into both my professional role and the ongoing house renovation, I established new rhythms and connections. I joined a local running group that met Saturday mornings in the lakefront park. I reconnected with former classmates who had remained in or returned to Oakwood Hills, discovering that shared hometown roots provided foundation for new adult friendships despite divergent life paths. Throughout this period of reconstruction, Dad's journals provided both guidance and comfort. I read them sequentially, absorbing his observations about family dynamics, community changes, and his evolving perspective on what constituted meaningful legacy. His entries during my deployment revealed both pride in my service and concern for my safety, the natural tension of a father supporting his daughter's chosen path while worrying about her well-being. 6 weeks into my new position, I received an unexpected email from Vanessa with the subject line, "Grandmother's Desk." The message was brief and surprisingly straightforward. I found Grandmother Eleanor's writing desk in storage today while organizing some furniture. It wasn't included in our formal inventory because I had forgotten it was in the basement of my design studio rather than at the house. Given your role as trustee of her legacy, it should rightfully be with you. Let me know when might be convenient for delivery. The desk she referenced had been a cherished possession of our grandmother, a Queen Anne secretary with delicate inlay work and secret compartments where she had stored correspondence and family documents. I remembered sitting beside it as a child, watching Grandmother Eleanor write letters in her elegant script, occasionally allowing me to place the wax seal on special correspondence. Despite our settlement agreement and recent civil interaction, I hadn't expected Vanessa to voluntarily return items not specifically covered in our legal arrangements. Her gesture suggested continuing evolution in her approach to family legacy, perhaps influenced by Dad's journal reflections she had read. I replied with appreciation and suggested delivery to the Hamilton house the following weekend, mentioning that the renovation was progressing well. Her response came quickly. "The Hamilton house on Hillcrest? Dad always thought that property would suit you perfectly. Glad to hear you found it. Saturday morning works for delivery." The casual reference to Dad's thoughts about the property surprised me. He had apparently shared his observation with Vanessa as well as recording it in his journal, suggesting he had maintained hope for eventual sisterly connection despite our differences. When Saturday arrived, I was clearing debris from the back garden when a delivery truck pulled into the driveway. Rather than the third-party service I had expected, Vanessa herself emerged from the passenger side, with 2 delivery men exiting the truck's cab. "I wanted to make sure it was handled properly," she explained, walking toward me. "The desk has some fragile elements that require careful attention during transport." She supervised the unloading process with professional precision, directing the placement in the front parlor I had designated as a reading room. Once the delivery men departed, she remained, studying the partially renovated space with an appraising eye. "You've preserved the original moldings," she noted with apparent approval. "So many people rip out these architectural details without understanding their value." "They don't make craftsmanship like this anymore," I replied. "The house needs updating for modern functionality, but not at the expense of its historic character." Vanessa nodded, moving toward the adjoining dining room where original built-in cabinetry had been carefully restored. "You've found a good balance between preservation and modernization. It's respectful of the home's heritage while making it livable for contemporary needs." Coming from someone with professional design experience, the assessment carried weight beyond casual compliment. Vanessa had always possessed genuine aesthetic discernment, whatever her other limitations. "Would you like to see the rest?" I offered, surprising myself with the invitation. She accepted, and we toured the house together, her designer's eye, noting details I had overlooked and suggesting unobtrusive modifications that would enhance both functionality and period authenticity. In the kitchen, where I had removed deteriorated cabinets but not yet installed replacements, she sketched a layout that would incorporate modern appliances while respecting the room's original proportions. "The peninsula you're planning would interrupt the natural flow," she explained, showing me an alternative arrangement on her rough sketch. "This configuration maintains historical accuracy while adding the counter space you need." Her suggestions were objectively superior to my initial plans, reflecting both professional expertise and sensitivity to the home's architectural integrity. Despite our complicated history, I found myself appreciating this aspect of her skill set. Her ability to envision spaces that balanced form and function. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "These are excellent recommendations." Something in her expression shifted, a momentary vulnerability breaking through her professional composure. "I'd be happy to help with the design aspects of your renovation, if you'd consider it. No charge, of course. Just sibling input." The offer hung between us, representing more than design consultation. It suggested tentative movement toward a different relationship, not erasing past conflicts but potentially building something new alongside them. "I'd appreciate that," I replied after brief consideration. "Your expertise would be valuable, especially for the historical elements." We ended up in the kitchen with coffee, discussing renovation timelines and design considerations with surprising ease. As our conversation concluded, Vanessa hesitated before gathering her things. "I've been meaning to tell you," she said, her tone more formal now. "Mark and I are separating. It's been coming for a while, but finalizing the estate matters clarified some fundamental differences in our values and priorities." "I'm sorry," I offered, and meant it sincerely despite my complicated feelings about her husband's role in our inheritance conflict. She shook her head slightly. "It's the right decision, though difficult. Reading Dad's journals made me realize I've been constructing my life around external validation rather than authentic purpose. Mark and I built our relationship on mutual social ambition rather than genuine connection or shared values." The self-awareness in her assessment echoed the insights from our earlier cafe conversation. Whatever she had read in Dad's journals had catalyzed significant reconsideration of her life choices. "I've also decided to restructure my design business," she continued. "I'm shifting focus toward healthcare and educational environments rather than luxury residential work. The Children's Hospital project opened my eyes to how design can support emotional well-being during difficult circumstances." "That sounds meaningful," I said, recognizing echoes of Dad's hopes that Vanessa might eventually find purpose beyond acquisition and status. "It's less lucrative, but more satisfying," she acknowledged with a small smile. "I'm learning that Dad was right about the difference between impressive work and important work." As she prepared to leave, Vanessa paused by Grandmother Eleanor's desk, now situated near the front window where morning light illuminated its rich wood grain. "She would be pleased to see this in your home. She always said you had her sense of stewardship, understanding that valuable things should be preserved, not just possessed." The observation aligned with passages in Dad's journals distinguishing between our different approaches to family legacy. She taught me that distinction, though I didn't fully understand it as a child. "I'm beginning to understand it now," Vanessa replied, her expression thoughtful. "Too late for some things, perhaps, but maybe not for others." After she departed, I examined the desk more carefully, appreciating its craftsmanship and historical significance within our family. Opening drawers and testing the mechanical functions of its writing surface, I discovered a small lever that revealed one of the secret compartments Grandmother Eleanor had occasionally shown me during childhood visits. Inside lay a sealed envelope, addressed simply, "For the trustee." With careful fingers, I opened the envelope and found a handwritten letter dated shortly before my grandmother's death, when I was 16 and unaware of any trust plans involving my future role. To the Mitchell trustee, if you are reading this, you have discovered my favorite hiding place in this desk. A fitting beginning to your stewardship of family legacy beyond obvious treasures. The true wealth of any family lies not in objects that can be appraised or accounts that can be tallied, but in values transmitted through generations. The Mitchell legacy includes certain consistent themes: integrity in business dealings, innovation in addressing community challenges, and commitment to leaving each place better than we found it. These values cannot be inherited passively. They must be actively embraced and demonstrated through choices that often involve sacrifice of immediate benefit for lasting impact. Each generation must reinterpret these principles within their contemporary context while maintaining their essential character. The formal trust documentation addresses material assets and their approved uses. This personal message concerns the more significant trust I place in you, confidence that you will embody and extend our family's commitment to meaningful contribution rather than mere accumulation. Whatever your individual path, remember that we are builders by heritage, if not always by profession. We construct not just structures, but relationships, opportunities, and legacies that outlive our individual spans. Choose building projects worthy of your limited time and considerable capacities. With faith in your stewardship, Eleanor Mitchell. The letter's contents resonated deeply with my current circumstances, both professional role and personal reconstruction. Grandmother Eleanor's emphasis on building worthy legacies aligned perfectly with my infrastructure resilience work and parallel efforts to rebuild my life on solid foundations after military service and family conflict. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.